What if I told you that the very behaviors you think are protecting you are destroying your life from the inside out? That the masks you wear, the roles you play, and the parts of yourself you've learned to hide are slowly poisoning every relationship, every opportunity, and every chance at genuine happiness you'll ever have. You see, most people walk through life believing they know themselves. They think their conscious mind, that voice in their head that makes decisions, plans their day and judges others, is who they are. But what if everything you believed about yourself was nothing more than an elaborate performance? A carefully constructed lie you've been telling yourself for so long that you've forgotten it's not real. Carl Gustav Jung, the pioneering Swiss psychiatrist who revolutionized our understanding of the human psyche, spent over 6 decades studying the hidden forces that govern human behavior. What he discovered will shake you to your core. The behaviors most people use to navigate life are not just ineffective, they're toxic. They create a psychological prison so sophisticated that most people never even realize they're trapped. Jung called this prison the persona, the mask we wear to face the world. But here's what most people don't understand. When you live behind a mask for too long, you don't just hide from others, you hide from yourself. You become split, fragmented, living a life that looks successful on the outside while slowly dying on the inside. Perhaps you've felt this death. Perhaps you've wondered why your relationships feel shallow, why success feels empty, and why despite having everything you thought you wanted, you still feel profoundly alone. Jung would tell you that this isn't a personal failing. It's the inevitable result of specific toxic behaviors that modern society not only accepts, but rewards. Today, we're going to expose 5 of these behaviors that Jung identified as the most destructive forces in human psychology. These aren't obvious flaws like anger or greed. These are subtle, socially acceptable behaviors that slowly erode your soul while everyone around you applauds your strength and success. By the time we're finished, you'll understand why Jung believed that the greatest tragedy in life isn't failure. It's succeeding at becoming someone you were never meant to be. Carl Jung's most revolutionary insight wasn't about the mind. It was about the lie. The lie that you are who you think you are. The lie that your conscious thoughts and decisions represent your true self. The lie that by controlling your external behavior, you're controlling your life. Jung discovered that every human being lives with what he called the collective unconscious, a deep layer of the psyche that contains universal patterns of behavior, images, and experiences that shape us far more powerfully than our conscious mind ever could. But more importantly, he realized that most people are completely unconscious of these forces, making them prisoners of patterns they don't even know exist. In his seminal work, The Undiscovered Self, Jung wrote, "The individual has never been more at the mercy of his unconscious forces than he is today." He wasn't talking about dramatic psychiatric breakdowns or obvious mental illness. He was talking about you. He was talking about the way you sabotage your relationships without knowing why. The way you choose careers that slowly kill your spirit. The way you repeat the same destructive patterns over and over, each time convinced you're making a conscious choice. Jung identified what he called the shadow, the part of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge, the traits and impulses we've pushed into the darkness because they don't fit our idealized self-image. But here's the terrifying truth. The shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It grows stronger. It begins to control your behavior in ways so subtle that you mistake its influence for your authentic desires. The 5 toxic behaviors we're about to explore aren't random character flaws. There are systematic ways that your shadow takes control of your life, while your conscious mind remains convinced it's in charge. They're the mechanisms by which you become your own worst enemy, sabotaging everything you claim to want, while feeling utterly helpless to stop. Jung called this process projection, the unconscious act of seeing in others what we refuse to see in ourselves. But projection is just one weapon in the shadow's arsenal. There's also inflation, the delusion that you're more than human, more enlightened, more evolved than others. There's regression, the unconscious retreat into childish behaviors when faced with adult challenges. Each of these behaviors creates what Jung termed psychological suffering, not the clean pain of physical injury or obvious loss, but the slow, grinding anguish of living a life that isn't truly yours. It's the suffering of potential unfulfilled, of authenticity sacrificed for acceptance, of the soul slowly suffocating under the weight of who you think you should be. The question isn't whether you engage in these behaviors. Everyone does. The question is whether you're ready to see them enough to break free. Picture this. You're in a meeting and someone asks for your opinion on a project. Before you speak, you run through 17 different versions of your response in your head, calculating how each word will be received, what impression it will create, whether it makes you sound intelligent enough, confident enough, successful enough. By the time you finally speak, your authentic opinion has been so filtered and refined that even you're not sure what you think anymore. Jung would recognize this immediately as the toxic behavior he called persona inflation, the unconscious belief that your worth depends entirely on maintaining a perfect image. You've become so skilled at being who others expect you to be that you've lost touch with who you are underneath all that performance. The perfectionist's prison isn't about having high standards. It's about the exhausting, soul-crushing need to be flawless in every interaction, every decision, every moment of your visible life. You've convinced yourself that this is strength, that this is what successful people do. But Jung understood something different. Perfectionism is fear disguised as excellence. Here's what's happening in your psyche. Your shadow, all the messy, imperfect human parts of yourself, has been so thoroughly rejected that you live in constant terror of it being exposed. Every mistake becomes a catastrophe because it threatens the carefully constructed image you've built. Every criticism cuts deeper than it should because you've staked your entire identity on being beyond reproach. The perfectionist believes they're protecting themselves from judgment, but they're ensuring they'll never be truly seen. You can't connect authentically with others when you're constantly monitoring and adjusting your behavior. You can't make genuine decisions when you're more concerned with how they'll look than how they'll feel. You can't discover who you are when you're spending all your energy being who you think you should be. Jung observed that perfectionists often achieve external success, which makes this behavior particularly insidious. You get rewarded for your performance, promoted for your polish, praised for your flawless execution. But inside, you're slowly dying of thirst while everyone congratulates you on how well you're swimming. The tragedy isn't that you fail, it's that you succeed at becoming a beautifully crafted prison warden, perfectly managing your captivity. You pride yourself on being rational, logical, the person others turn to in a crisis, because you don't let feelings cloud your judgment. When someone is crying, you offer solutions. When someone is angry, you explain why their anger is illogical. When someone is afraid, you list all the statistical reasons their fear is unfounded. But here's what you don't realize. You're not managing emotions. You're being managed by them. Jung discovered that the psyche operates by what he called compensation. When you push something into the unconscious, it doesn't disappear. It grows more powerful and begins to control you from the shadows. Every emotion you refuse to feel doesn't vanish. It gets stored in your body, your behavior, and your automatic reactions. You think you're being strong when you don't let things get to you, but you're allowing your unfelt emotions to make decisions for you unconsciously. That sudden irritation you feel when someone cries, that's your repressed sadness defending itself. That dismissive attitude toward others' fears, that's your terror trying to stay hidden. Jung called this emotional dissociation, the splitting off of feeling from consciousness. You've learned to live entirely in your head, believing that thoughts are more valuable than feelings. that rationality is superior to emotion. But here's what you've missed. Emotions aren't obstacles to clear thinking. They're essential information about what matters to you, what threatens you, what you need. When you deny your emotions, you lose access to your intuition, your passion, and your ability to connect deeply with others. You become what Jung called a thinking type, taken to pathological extremes, brilliant at analysis, but incapable of genuine human warmth. People around you learn to come to you for advice, but never for comfort. They respect your intelligence, but don't feel safe sharing their hearts with you. The most destructive part of this behavior is how it spreads. You don't just deny your own emotions, you invalidate others' feelings too. You become the person who responds to, "I'm hurt," with, "That's irrational," or "You shouldn't feel that way." You turn every emotional moment into a problem to be solved, rather than an experience to be shared. You think you're being helpful, but you're teaching everyone around you that their inner world doesn't matter. You've learned something that most people never figure out. There's tremendous power in powerlessness. When you're the victim, you're never responsible. When you're suffering, others owe you attention, care, and consideration. When you're wronged, you get to be righteous. It's a brilliant psychological strategy, except it's slowly destroying every relationship you have and every opportunity for genuine happiness. Jung identified this as one of the most insidious forms of what he called psychological manipulation, the unconscious use of suffering to control others. You don't wake up planning to manipulate people. You genuinely feel hurt, genuinely believe you've been wronged, and genuinely experience yourself as powerless. But underneath that genuine pain is a shadow strategy that uses weakness as a weapon. Here's how it works. When something goes wrong in your life, your first instinct isn't to ask, "How did I contribute to this?" Or, "What can I learn from this?" Your first instinct is to identify who did this to you. Your boss made impossible demands. Your partner doesn't understand you. Your family doesn't appreciate you. The world is unfair, people are selfish, and you're the unfortunate recipient of everyone else's failures. This victim narrative serves multiple unconscious functions. It protects you from taking responsibility, which feels scary and overwhelming. It guarantees you'll receive sympathy and attention, which feeds your need for connection. It makes you morally superior to those who have wronged you, which inflates your ego. It's a complete psychological ecosystem designed to keep you exactly where you are while making everyone else responsible for your happiness. But here's what Jung understood that you don't. Every moment you spend as a victim is a moment you're not spending as the author of your own life. Every injustice you collect is a choice you're making to give your power away to someone else. Every time you make your well-being dependent on others treating you better, you ensure that your well-being remains forever out of your control. The victim role feels safe because it's familiar, but it's the most dangerous position you can occupy. It guarantees that you'll keep creating the very experiences you claim to want to avoid, because unconsciously, you need them to maintain your identity. You've spent your entire life trying to manage the unmanageable. Other people's emotions, their decisions, their opinions of you, their reactions to your choices. You believe that if you can just be smart enough, strategic enough, careful enough, you can orchestrate life to unfold exactly as you want it to. You see chaos everywhere and appoint yourself as the person responsible for creating order. Jung would recognize this immediately as what he called the controlling ego, the part of the psyche that refuses to accept the fundamental uncertainty of existence. You've made yourself responsible for outcomes you cannot control, and this impossible task is slowly driving you mad. Here's what's happening. Your need to control others is a desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable feelings inside yourself. When someone acts unpredictably, it triggers your anxiety, so you try to make them more predictable. When someone disagrees with you, It threatens your sense of reality, so you try to convince them you're right. When someone doesn't respond to you the way you want, it activates your fear of rejection, so you manipulate the situation to get the response you need. You think you're being helpful when you offer unsolicited advice, when you point out what others are doing wrong, when you try to fix their problems. But what you're doing is trying to manage your discomfort with their autonomy. You can't tolerate other people having experiences you didn't approve of, making choices you wouldn't make, or feeling emotions that make you uncomfortable. The controlling behavior creates exactly what you're trying to avoid: resistance, resentment, and distance. People begin to feel suffocated around you. They stop sharing their real thoughts and feelings because they know you'll try to change them. They start making decisions without consulting you because they're tired of being managed. They pull away emotionally because they need space to be themselves. Jung observed that controllers often justify their behavior as love or care, but it's a form of unconscious tyranny. You're trying to turn the people around you into characters in a play you're directing, but real relationships require allowing others to be the authors of their own stories, even when you don't like how the story unfolds. You've become a master of giving people exactly what they want to see. In professional settings, you're a competent achiever. With friends, you're a reliable supporter. With family, you're the dutiful child or parent. With romantic partners, you're the ideal companion. You've developed such a sophisticated understanding of social dynamics that you can read a room in seconds and become whoever that room needs you to be. This isn't conscious manipulation. It's something much deeper and more tragic. Jung called it living from the persona, becoming so identified with the masks you wear that you lose contact with the person underneath. You've spent so much energy becoming who others need you to be that you've forgotten who you are when no one is watching. The false self develops as a survival strategy, usually in childhood, when you learned that certain parts of your authentic personality were unacceptable to the people whose love you needed. So you learned to hide those parts and amplify the traits that got you positive attention. Over time, this adaptive strategy became an automatic way of being. You stopped consciously choosing to perform and started unconsciously believing that the performance was your true self. Here's the devastating consequence. You can achieve remarkable external success while feeling profoundly empty inside. You can be surrounded by people who admire and appreciate you while feeling utterly alone. You can master the art of being loved for who you pretend to be while aching to be seen for who you are. The false self is exhausting to maintain because it requires constant vigilance. You're always monitoring your behavior, adjusting your responses, and calculating the impact of your words. You live in perpetual fear that someone will see behind the mask and discover that you're not as together, as confident, as capable as you appear. This fear drives you to perfect your performance even further, creating an ever-increasing distance between your authentic self and your presented self. Jung understood that the false self isn't evil. It's a creative solution to an impossible problem. But when that solution becomes your prison, when you can no longer remember who you were before you learned to be who others needed, you've lost the most precious thing you possess, your authentic relationship with yourself. You've discovered something that most people miss. There are higher truths, deeper meanings, spiritual principles that transcend the messy complications of ordinary human existence. While others get caught up in petty dramas, you focus on love and light. While they struggle with negative emotions, you choose gratitude and positivity. While they're trapped in ego, you're evolving toward enlightenment. But Jung would see something different in your spiritual pursuits, the most sophisticated form of psychological avoidance he ever encountered. What you call spiritual growth, he would recognize as spiritual bypassing, using spiritual concepts and practices to avoid dealing with the fundamental human experiences of pain, conflict, and shadow. You've learned to use spirituality as a drug. When life becomes difficult, instead of facing the difficulty directly, you retreat into meditation, affirmations, or philosophical concepts about everything happening for a reason. When someone confronts you about your behavior, you respond with spiritual platitudes about forgiveness and letting go. When you feel angry or sad, you immediately try to transcend these lower emotions rather than understanding what they're trying to tell you. This creates a particularly insidious form of disconnection because it looks so healthy on the surface. You're not drinking or doing drugs or engaging in obviously destructive behavior. You're reading spiritual books, attending workshops, and practicing mindfulness. But you're using these practices to escape from yourself rather than to discover yourself. Jung believed that true spiritual growth required what he called integration, the conscious acceptance and transformation of all parts of the psyche, including the parts you find unacceptable. You can't transcend what you haven't first embraced. You can't love your neighbor as yourself if you haven't learned to love the parts of yourself you've been trying to spiritually bypass. The spiritual bypasser often becomes subtly superior to others, viewing their struggles as evidence of their lower level of consciousness. You develop a patronizing compassion that keeps you separate from the very people you claim to love. Your spirituality becomes another mask, another way of avoiding the vulnerable, messy, beautifully human experience of being authentically yourself in relationship with others. True spirituality, Jung argued, begins with radical honesty about who you are, not who you think you should be. As you've read through these 5 toxic behaviors, something uncomfortable has probably been happening. Perhaps you've recognized yourself in ways you didn't expect. Perhaps you've felt that particular kind of discomfort that comes when someone holds up a mirror you weren't prepared to look into. Perhaps you've noticed your mind already working to explain away these patterns, to convince you that your version is different, that your motivations are pure, that you're the exception to these psychological rules. That resistance, that immediate impulse to defend and justify, that's exactly what Jung was talking about. That's your ego protecting itself from the truth that could set you free. But here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. Awareness is the beginning of transformation. The moment you can see these patterns, without judgment, without immediate attempts to fix or change them, you've taken the first step toward reclaiming your authentic life. You see, these toxic behaviors aren't character flaws to be ashamed of. They're intelligent adaptations to impossible situations. At some point in your life, these strategies helped you survive, helped you get love, and helped you feel safe in a world that felt threatening. The problem isn't that you developed these patterns. The problem is that you've outgrown them without realizing it. You're still using childhood survival strategies in adult situations where they no longer serve you. Jung called the process of recognizing and integrating these shadow patterns individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are beneath all the roles, masks, and defenses. It's not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. It's not about eliminating your shadow, it's about making friends with it, understanding its purpose, and choosing consciously how to express its energy in healthy ways. This work isn't easy, and it's not quick. It requires what Jung called moral courage, the willingness to see yourself, to take responsibility for your unconscious patterns, and to change even when change feels terrifying. But the alternative is to remain trapped in behaviors that slowly poison every relationship and every opportunity for genuine happiness. The choice is yours. Continue living the life your unconscious patterns have been creating for you, or begin the difficult, beautiful work of becoming conscious enough to create the life you want. Which will you choose?